My wife told me she would do anything for me, and I never truly realized what she meant until I saw it. The diagnosis came on a Thursday afternoon in Dr. Okonkwo's sterile office that smelled like antiseptic and fear. Acute liver failure, he said, using words that sounded clinical until they rearranged themselves into a death sentence. My liver was destroying itself from a rare autoimmune condition that had gone undetected for years, and I had maybe 6 months without a transplant. The transplant waiting list averaged 18 months for my blood type and condition severity. Dr. Okonkwo delivered this information with practiced sympathy, while my wife Sophia sat beside me, gripping my hand hard enough to leave marks. I was 34 years old and had never been seriously ill in my life. I ran marathons, ate healthy, didn't drink or smoke. None of it mattered, because my immune system had decided my liver was the enemy and had been slowly destroying it for years. The symptoms I'd dismissed as stress and aging, the fatigue and occasional nausea, had been my body shutting down in stages. Now I was in end-stage failure, and the only options were transplant or hospice care within months. Sophia didn't cry in the doctor's office. She asked precise questions about donor requirements, compatibility testing, living donor procedures. Dr. Okonkwo explained that living liver donation was possible but complex, requiring a donor with compatible blood type and good health. The donor would undergo major surgery to remove a portion of their liver, which would regenerate in both donor and recipient over time. The risks to the donor were significant, including infection, bleeding, bile leaks, and in rare cases, death. We drove home in silence through Atlanta traffic that felt surreal in its normalcy. People were living ordinary lives, worrying about ordinary problems, while I was calculating how many weeks I had left before my body completely failed. Sophia's hands were steady on the wheel, but I could see her jaw clenched, the muscle jumping with tension. When we got home to our small house in Decatur, she finally spoke. "I'm getting tested tomorrow. I'm type O negative universal donor. It'll work." I started to protest, but she cut me off with a look that made clear the decision wasn't up for discussion. "Marcus, you're my husband. We've been together since college, married for 8 years. You're not dying at 34 because we didn't try everything possible. I'm getting tested, and if I'm compatible, I'm doing this." The fierceness in her voice left no room for argument, but I felt uneasy in ways I couldn't articulate. Sophia had always been determined, had always approached problems with methodical intensity, but this felt different. The compatibility testing took 3 days and confirmed what Sophia had predicted. Perfect match on all markers, her liver the right size for transplantation, her blood type universal. Dr. Okonkwo called us back to his office to discuss next steps, and his expression was cautious in ways that made my stomach tighten. "Mrs. Chen, your test results show compatibility, but they also revealed something concerning. You have a mitral valve prolapse with moderate regurgitation. It's a heart condition that significantly increases surgical risk." Sophia's face stayed neutral, but I saw her fingers tighten on the armrest. "What kind of risk increase?" Dr. Okonkwo pulled up imaging on his computer, showing her heart with blood flowing backward through a valve that wasn't closing properly. "Your heart is working harder than it should to pump blood effectively. The stress of major surgery, especially something as extensive as liver donation, could cause cardiac complications. Arrhythmias, heart failure, potentially fatal outcomes. I can't in good conscience recommend you proceed with donation given this condition." The silence stretched for 10 seconds before Sophia spoke with perfect calm. "What's the percentage risk?" "Exactly." Dr. Okonkwo hesitated before answering. "Mortality risk for healthy donors is 0.5%. With your cardiac condition, I'd estimate it at 15 to 20%. 1 in 5 chance you don't survive the surgery or recovery. Even if you survive, you're at elevated risk for long-term complications. I'm sorry, but I can't approve this donation." I felt relief and guilt simultaneously, glad the decision was out of our hands, but knowing Sophia would take this as a personal failure. She thanked Dr. Okonkwo mechanically and we left, her silence on the drive home more frightening than tears would have been. At home, she went straight to our bedroom and I heard the door lock. I gave her space for an hour before knocking, finding her at her laptop with dozens of browser tabs open, researching liver donation and cardiac risk factors with obsessive focus. "Sophia, we'll find another donor. We'll reach out to family, friends, do public appeals. There are options." She looked at me with red-rimmed eyes and said quietly, "Your family is all the wrong blood type. My parents are too old. Our friends are either incompatible or have health issues. I checked everyone already, ran the numbers. I'm the only viable option and Okonkwo won't approve it because of a heart condition that might not even matter." The might not part triggered alarm bells. 15 to 20% mortality risk means it absolutely matters. I'm not letting you die trying to save me." Sophia closed her laptop and stood, coming to hold my face in her hands. "Do you remember our wedding vows? I said I would love you through anything, that nothing would stop me from protecting you. I meant it, Marcus. I meant every word." The intensity in her eyes scared me because it looked like determination bordering on obsession. Over the next 2 weeks, my condition deteriorated noticeably. The fatigue became exhausting, walking to the mailbox leaving me winded. My skin took on a yellow tinge from jaundice, my eyes becoming increasingly bloodshot. Dr. Okonkwo adjusted my medications and put me on the transplant list with high priority, but warned that finding a deceased donor match could still take months I didn't have. Sophia attended every appointment, asked questions about every treatment option, and spent hours each night researching with frightening focus. I noticed she started having private phone conversations that stopped when I entered rooms. She took afternoon appointments she claimed were for her own health checkups, but she was vague about details when I asked. When I checked our bank account, I saw large withdrawals, 3,000 here, 5,000 there, money disappearing with cryptic descriptions. I confronted her about it, and she said she was consulting specialists about treatment options, getting second opinions, exploring alternatives. The explanation felt insufficient, but I was too exhausted to push harder. 6 weeks after the initial diagnosis, Dr. Okonkwo called with news about a possible deceased donor match. Someone in a car accident, brain dead but with organs suitable for donation, my blood type and liver size. It felt grotesque to be hoping for someone's death to save my life, but desperation erased moral complexity. The transplant was scheduled for the following morning, emergency surgery that could give me years instead of weeks. Sophia drove me to the hospital at 4 a.m., both of us silent with anxiety and desperate hope. The pre-op process took hours, nurses checking vitals and starting IVs while surgical residents explained the procedure. Dr. Okonkwo came in at 7 a.m. looking troubled, his expression making my heart sink before he even spoke. "Marcus, I'm sorry. The donor liver showed damage during extraction. It's not viable for transplant. We're canceling the surgery." The devastation was absolute. I'd mentally prepared for success, had allowed myself to hope, and now faced return to slow deterioration with no backup plan. Sophia's face went pale, and she left the room abruptly, returning 20 minutes later with composed features but something different in her eyes. She helped me get dressed, and we drove home in heavy silence, my mind cycling through worst-case scenarios about dying before another donor materialized. That evening, Sophia made my favorite dinner despite me having no appetite. We ate mechanically, and then she sat me down on the couch, taking my hands in hers. "Marcus, I need to tell you something. I'm going to donate my liver to you. I found a surgeon who will do it, someone who specializes in high-risk cases. It's scheduled for next week." The words took several seconds to process before I reacted with immediate refusal. "Absolutely not. Okonkwo said your heart condition makes it too dangerous. I won't let you risk dying for me." Sophia's expression stayed calm but determined. "The surgeon I found, Dr. Amari Baptiste, has done hundreds of high-risk donations. He reviewed my cardiac imaging and believes the risk is manageable with the right surgical team and monitoring. Yes, there's risk, but there's risk in all surgery. I'm doing this." I realized then what the private calls and bank withdrawals had been about. She'd been shopping for a surgeon who would approve what our doctor had refused, someone willing to overlook medical ethics for the right price. You bribed someone to agree to this. That's what the money was for, wasn't it? Finding a doctor who would say yes when the answer should be no. Sophia didn't deny it. I found someone willing to take the risk seriously instead of dismissing it outright. Dr. Baptiste runs a private surgical center that handles complex cases other hospitals won't touch. He's legitimate, licensed, experienced. And yes, his fees are higher than standard procedures, but that's because he takes cases no one else will. The justification sounded reasonable until I thought about why reputable hospitals refused these cases, because the risk-benefit analysis didn't justify gambling a healthy person's life against surgical complications. You're describing a surgeon who ignores medical ethics for money. That's not someone I want operating on you. Sophia's composure cracked slightly. "Marcus, you're dying. Your liver is failing and you have maybe 2 months left. I can save you, and I'm not going to watch you die because some doctor is too risk-averse to try." We fought for hours that night. My position that she shouldn't risk her life for mine. Her position that my life was worth any risk. We both said things meant to hurt. Accusations about selfishness and martyrdom and who was being more unreasonable. Eventually, we fell into exhausted silence. No resolution, just the weight of impossible choices. I thought the fight had convinced her to abandon the plan, but I underestimated her determination. 3 days later, I woke feeling worse than usual, the nausea overwhelming enough that I could barely stand. Sophia helped me to the bathroom where I vomited bile, my body rejecting everything. She suggested going to the hospital for hydration and monitoring, and I agreed because I felt genuinely terrible. We drove to an address I didn't recognize until we pulled into a private medical facility in a suburb I'd never visited. The building looked professional enough, modern architecture with medical signage, but something felt wrong. Sophia helped me inside where nurses were waiting, moving me immediately to a pre-op room. I was too disoriented to fight effectively as they got me into a gown and started IVs, my protests weak and confused. Sophia stood beside me holding my hand, and I realized through the brain fog what was happening. "This is Dr. Baptiste's facility. You're doing this now, aren't you? You didn't get my consent." She squeezed my hand, and her eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry for the deception, but Marcus, I love you more than anything. I can't watch you die when I have the power to save you. This is happening." The surgical team moved with practiced efficiency, despite my attempts to refuse. Dr. Baptiste came in, A tall man in his 50s with steady hands and kind eyes that somehow made the whole situation worse. He explained the procedure quickly, confirming Sophia's cardiac condition was known and that special monitoring would be in place. I tried to argue I hadn't consented, that this was illegal, but he calmly said Sophia had provided consent as my medical power of attorney, and I was in no condition to make sound medical decisions. The legal gymnastics were probably questionable, but everyone was committed to this course. Sophia leaned down to kiss my forehead, her tears falling onto my face. When you wake up, you'll be angry and maybe you'll hate me for a while, but you'll be alive. That's all that matters. The anesthesiologist pushed medication into my IV, and the world started going soft around the edges. My last clear thought was fury at being forced into accepting this sacrifice, at Sophia gambling her life without my agreement. I woke in a recovery room with pain that felt like someone had split me open and rearranged my organs, which was essentially accurate. A nurse was checking monitors and increased my pain medication when she saw me conscious. I tried to ask about Sophia, but my throat was too dry, the breathing tube having been removed recently. The nurse gave me ice chips and told me the surgery had been successful, that I was stable and recovering well. When I asked about my wife, her expression changed to something careful and practiced. Dr. Baptiste came in 30 minutes later with an expression that made my blood turn cold despite the warm blankets. Marcus, your surgery went perfectly. The liver transplant was successful, and you're recovering as expected. However, Sophia experienced complications during her procedure. Her heart went into arrhythmia during the surgery, and we had to perform emergency cardiac intervention. She's currently in the ICU in critical condition. We're doing everything possible, but the next few days will be crucial. The words felt like they were being spoken from underwater, information that my brain rejected, because accepting it meant accepting that Sophia was dying because of me. I tried to get up, to go to her, but the nurse and Dr. Baptiste restrained me gently, explaining I was post-op and couldn't move yet. I was trapped in a hospital bed with a stranger's liver growing inside me, while my wife fought for her life down the hall, and the injustice of it made me want to tear the IVs out and reverse everything. The next 48 hours existed in a blur of pain medication and terror. The nurses updated me every few hours on Sophia's condition, always with the same careful language about her being stable but critical, being monitored closely, the cardiac team doing everything possible. I wasn't allowed to see her because moving me risked complications with my surgery, so I lay in that bed imagining worst-case scenarios and hating myself for not fighting harder against this plan. On the third day, Dr. Baptiste came in looking exhausted and sat beside my bed. Marcus, Sophia is in a medically induced coma. The cardiac complications were severe and caused some oxygen deprivation to her brain. We won't know the extent of neurological damage until we try to wake her, but there's a real possibility of permanent impairment. I'm sorry, we knew the risks were elevated, but sometimes even with preparation, bodies don't respond as expected. The guilt was physically painful, worse than the surgical incisions. Sophia had known this could happen, had understood the risks, and chosen to proceed anyway, but I should have stopped her more forcefully. I should have refused to go anywhere near this facility, should have called police or ethics boards or anyone who could prevent this disaster. Instead, I'd been passive in my deteriorated state, had let her sacrifice herself, and now she was brain damaged in a coma because she loved me too much. 2 weeks after the surgery, they let me see her for the first time. I was stable enough to use a wheelchair, healing on schedule from my transplant. A nurse wheeled me to the ICU, where Sophia lay motionless with tubes and monitors covering her. The ventilator breathed for her. The feeding tube delivered nutrition. The catheters and IVs managed everything her body couldn't. She looked smaller in the hospital bed, younger and more fragile than I'd ever seen her. I held her hand and cried until the nurse said visiting hours were over. The medical bills were catastrophic. The private facility didn't take insurance, demanded payment up front for both surgeries plus the extended ICU stay. Sophia had drained our savings to pay for my procedure, and now we owed hundreds of thousands more for her complications and ongoing care. I was recovering from major surgery, couldn't work, and faced financial ruin on top of potentially losing my wife. The irony was brutal. She'd saved my life and destroyed both our futures in the process. 3 weeks post-surgery, they tried to waken Sophia from the coma. I sat beside her bed while the medical team reduced sedation and monitored her brain activity. Her eyes opened eventually, but didn't track properly, didn't seem to recognize me or her surroundings. The neurologist did assessments and confirmed significant brain damage from the oxygen deprivation. Sophia had lost motor control on her left side, showed signs of cognitive impairment, couldn't speak coherently. The woman who'd methodically researched my treatment options and found a surgeon was now someone who couldn't feed herself or form complete sentences. The guilt became suffocating. My wife had given me life at the cost of her own quality of life, had become permanently disabled, saving me. I visited her daily during my recovery, watching therapists try to reteach basic skills, seeing her frustration when her body wouldn't cooperate with commands her damaged brain couldn't properly form. Some days she seemed to recognize me, would grip my hand and make sounds that might have been my name. Other days she stared blankly like I was a stranger. 6 weeks after the surgery, my recovery was progressing well. The transplanted liver was functioning, my body accepting the organ, all the markers heading in positive directions. I was scheduled to be discharged and face the reality of being a healthy man whose wife was permanently disabled because of me. Dr. Baptiste called me into his office before discharge, his expression troubled in new ways. "Marcus, I need to tell you something that's been eating at me. Sophia came to me 6 months ago, long before you were diagnosed. She'd already researched your family history and identified genetic markers that suggested you'd develop liver disease. She wanted to donate preemptively, before you got sick, but I refused because you were healthy and the surgery couldn't be justified. She called me every week after that, offering more money, begging me to reconsider. When you were diagnosed, she came back immediately with cash and an ultimatum. I could do the surgery, or she'd find someone less qualified who would. The information rearranged my understanding of everything. She knew I'd get sick before I did? How is that possible? Dr. Baptiste pulled up genetic testing reports, showing Sophia had gotten my DNA tested without my knowledge, had identified markers for autoimmune liver disease, had been preparing for my eventual diagnosis months in advance. She'd known before I had symptoms, before any doctor suspected, and she'd been planning her sacrifice before I knew I needed saving. There's more, Dr. Baptiste continued, and I braced for additional revelations. Sophia's cardiac condition wasn't just a risk factor. She'd had 2 previous episodes of serious arrhythmia that required hospitalization. She knew exactly how dangerous the surgery would be for her because she'd already been warned by multiple cardiologists that major surgery could kill her. She concealed that medical history from me initially. I only found out after complications started. She came into this knowing death or disability were likely outcomes, and she chose to do it anyway. The scope of her sacrifice hit me in waves. She'd identified my genetic time bomb, had prepared for years to save me when it detonated, had known the attempt would probably destroy her, and had done it anyway because she loved me more than she valued her own life or health. The woman lying brain damaged in the ICU had calculated every risk and decided I was worth it, had given up everything so I could live. I didn't know whether to feel grateful or furious or devastated by the magnitude of her love. I was discharged 2 days later and moved into a rehabilitation center where Sophia was also staying for intensive therapy. Insurance had been denying claims because the private facility wasn't in network, leaving me with medical debt approaching $400,000. I started working remotely from the rehab center, doing consulting work I could manage while recovering, trying to generate income against the crushing bills. Sophia's progress was frustratingly slow. After 3 months of therapy, she'd regained some mobility on her left side, but walked with a severe limp and limited arm function. Her speech improved to short sentences, but she struggled with memory and complex thinking. The woman who'd researched genetic markers and surgical risks now needed help remembering to brush her teeth. I watched therapists work with her daily and felt my heart break continuously at what she'd lost, saving me. The investigation started 4 months after the surgery when the state medical board received an anonymous complaint about Dr. Baptiste performing unethical surgeries for profit. The investigator interviewed me about our case, and I tried to protect Dr. Baptiste, explaining he'd been helping desperate people when hospitals had refused. But the investigation uncovered other cases where he'd performed risky surgeries on patients who'd bribed their way into his facility, multiple instances where people had died or been permanently damaged. Dr. Baptiste's license was revoked and his facility shut down. He faced criminal charges for practicing medicine contrary to standard of care and accepting bribes to overlook medical ethics. I testified at his hearing, trying to present the nuanced truth that he'd saved my life, even if his methods were questionable. But the medical board showed case after case of people he'd harmed through reckless risk-taking, painting him as a predator who exploited desperate patients for money. He was sentenced to 3 years in prison and banned from medical practice permanently. The hospital bills became unmanageable. I was working full-time remotely while visiting Sophia daily at the rehabilitation center, trying to coordinate her care and manage our finances. The debt collectors called constantly, threatening lawsuits and wage garnishment. I consulted a bankruptcy lawyer who explained we'd lose our house, our savings, everything we'd built together, but at least the medical debt would be discharged. Sophia had been out of acute care for 6 months when her speech improved enough to have real conversations. I visited her at the rehabilitation facility where she now lived semi-permanently. Her disability's too severe for home care I couldn't afford. She recognized me clearly that day, smiled when I walked in, said my name with only slight slurring. We sat together in her room and I held her functioning right hand, her left side still mostly paralyzed from the brain damage. Was it worth it? I asked, the question I'd been holding for months. Knowing what it cost you, would you do it again? Sophia's response took several tries to form the words clearly. You're alive. That's all I wanted. Seeing you healthy makes everything worth it. The simple answer destroyed me because she meant it, because even brain damaged and disabled, she valued my life over her own quality of life. I filed for bankruptcy the following week, and we lost everything except my income and basic possessions. The house went into foreclosure, the savings were liquidated to pay partial debts, and the medical bills were discharged. Sophia's ongoing care was covered by Medicaid since she was now permanently disabled with no income. The system that had failed to provide affordable treatment when I needed it now provided care for the woman who'd destroyed herself saving me. 2 years after the surgery, I visit Sophia 3 times per week at the long-term care facility where she lives. Her condition has plateaued, improvements minimal now. This probably the best she'll ever be. She walks with a cane, speaks in short sentences, needs help with complex tasks. We play simple card games and watch movies together, her damaged brain able to follow basic plots but not complicated narratives. She remembers me clearly most days, smiles when I arrive, tells me she loves me with words that come slowly but sincerely. I'm healthy and surviving with someone else's liver growing inside me, the organ that came at the cost of my wife's whole self. I'll carry that guilt forever, even as I'm grateful for the extra years her sacrifice bought me. Some nights I wish she'd let me die instead, wish I'd fought harder against her determination, wish love hadn't been so absolute that she'd destroy herself to save me. But Sophia looks at me with whatever's left of the brilliant mind that once researched genetic markers and surgical risks, and she smiles like saving me was the only choice that mattered. The medical system failed us both, but my wife's love was more absolute than any failure, and I'm learning to live with the weight of being someone worth dying for. If you enjoyed this, you'll definitely want to see the next ones too. So subscribe now and let me know your take in the comments.